All right, Jabosai, good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning share. To thank our annual TALMUD Torah sponsor, the Tilson Family of Am Yisroel, for dedicating all the Shur and Drushos this year as a zechus for besuros, tovos for Am Yisroel. Our week of learning sponsors Berel and Rachel Galkin in commemoration of Berel's grandfather's yahrzeit, Berel Ben Chaim, whose yahrzeit is on Yud Aleph Shvat, who was on Yud Aleph Shvat. We open the merit of our TALMUD Torah. In the Shabbat have an Aliyah, the family ein nechama. We should be zocheh merit Hashem that all of our hostages should come home b'shalom, and the karov and our holy soldiers should be successful b'chol ma'asei yedeihem. We'll say with that, let us begin. Today's daf is Nazayin. A very special thank you to Rabbi Richter for giving the shir over the last few days. Again, my apologies again for yesterday, but it is a great zechus Baruch Hashem to be back with everyone, and let us begin. So today's daf is Nun Zayin. We are picking up in Meretz Hashem on the bottom of Nun Vav Amud Beis. So we left off with Rabbi Yehuda Omer, which is 2, 4, 6, 7 lines up from the bottom. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Am Yisroel lo nitztava ela al avodah zara bilvad. So again, remember, our entire sugya over here is the sugya of Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Noach. And again, the fascinating sugya, it's interesting that one of the fascinating things that we've seen is, whereas everyone agrees that B'nei Noach were mitzvah on 7 mitzvos, there's a fundamental machlokes as to what comprises those particular 7 mitzvos. So Rabbi Yehuda is the first who comes along and says, no, Adam Rishon was only mitzvah on 1 mitzvah, avodah zara. He was not to worship idolatry. Shnei Amar, vayitzav Hashem Elokim ala Adam. Pasuk says Hashem commanded Adam, and again that lashon of vayitzav we've already seen before is a lashon of avodah zara. We'll say it's actually quite dramatic to think about this. That Adam Rishon would have been mitzvah on avodah zara, right? What exactly were his alternatives? What exactly was But what you see from here is that there is this innate pull. There's this innate pull away from HaKadosh Baruch Hu that man was created with. And this is incredibly important that, remember, the only reason why Avodas Hashem is meaningful is because there's in general in life, the only reason why something is meaningful is because there's something pulling you away from it. If there's no pull away from something, then there's no schar to run to something. So the only way that Adam Arishon is going to get schar for worshipping HaKadosh Baruch Hu is if he has this innate pull away from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In Chassidus, this is called the concept of Ratzol V'Shov, forward and backwards. Man always has this almost like innate back and forth within himself. On one hand, a power pulling me towards HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and on the other hand, a power pulling me away from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So therefore, again, it's incredible to see that Rabbi Yehuda says that Adam Rishon was mitzvah already on avodah zara. On avodah zara, incredible. Rabbi Yehuda ben Meseira Omer Aval Birkas Hashem. Rabbi Yehuda ben Meseira says even cursing HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So once again, you see that like almost innate to the human condition is this idea that man wants to rebel against HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Avodah zara, cursing Hashem. I mentioned this many times. Rabbi Shmuel Silber in Sichos Musar brings down that the psychology of chait in general, in other words, why do we sin? Why do people commit averos? So there's a lot of different explanations, but most basically, Rabbi Shmuel Silber explains that chait is the ultimate flexing of the muscles of self-autonomy. That when I sin, right, because it can't be about lust or desire, because if you think about it, the fallout of sin always outweighs whatever the benefit is. So why do we commit averos all the time? Deep down, Rabbi Shmuel Silber says the psychology of it is self-autonomy. Don't tell me what to do. Don't tell me what to do. Even though you're God, I'm Shmuel Silber. Don't tell me what to do. I need a gever, right? I'm in charge. And again, it sounds so crazy when you say it, but at the end of the day, deep down, that's what all of this is. So you see again that man is, because man has, and again, why does man have this desire for self-autonomy? Because man is made b'tselem Elokim. The Ribono Shel Olam is completely autonomous. That's what makes him great. That's what makes him HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So man has this incredible desire for self-autonomy as well. Others say that Adam was also commanded regarding setting up batei din, legal system. So Kiman Azlahada Am Rabbi Yehuda Am Rav, both says it's beautiful. So whose opinion is reflected over here in what Rabbi Yehuda says the name of Rav? Listen to this. So Rabbi Yehuda says the name of Rav, and so that HaKadosh Baruch Hu made multiple statements to Adam. What were the multiple statements? Number 1, Elokimani lo sikalaluni. This is what Hashem said to Adam. Adam, number 1, I'm God. don't curse me. Number 2, Elokim ani, lo simiruni, I am God, do not exchange me for anyone else. And number 3, Elokim ani, yehe morai aleichem. Ultimately, again, I am God, let my awe and reverence be upon you. Be upon you. These are the 3 statements. Kadosh Baruch Hu made to Adam. Kiman, whose opinion does this reflect? Ki yesh omrim. In accordance with the yesh omrim that we just said before. And I said there's so much profundity in this particular statement, right? That the initial relationship with Adam Arishon, is codified, using these, or is created using these 3 statements. Adam, I am your God, do not curse me. Adam, I am your God, do not go ahead and exchange me. And Adam, I am your God, let my reverence be upon you. We'll say it's interesting, by the way, what's missing from these statements? What's not here? I am your God, love me. Right, if you notice, by the way, for a very simple reason, that you can't legislate love. You can't force someone to love you. So instead what Kadosh Baruch Hu says is, Adam, here's what I'm asking of you, don't mistreat me. Don't mistreat me. Don't curse me. Don't exchange me. Revere me. And reverence usually manifests itself in different types of behavior. And then once we have that basic foundation, we can build love from that. Relationships, love is never the first step in a relationship. There's usually something before, especially in a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Incredible. So the Gemara says, Kiman kishom, turn to the Beit Menashe, I darish vayitzav afilu hanachnami. Sat on something. The Gemara is like this. Son of Beit Menashe say as follows. If you darish vayitzav, then these others should be included as well. I lo darish vayitzav, hani minale. From where do you know these? The olam lo darish vayitzav. So in reality, it doesn't actually know vayitzav. Hani kol chad v'chad ba'an pei nafshik siva. And in reality, all of these other prohibitions that were given to Adam Arishon ultimately are written on their own. So the Gemara says, where do we know this from? So how do we know that ultimately, again, Shemes B'nei Noach, that they include Avodah Zarah and Gilei Arayos? From where do we know that? Top of Nun Zayin, 57a. The pasuk says the earth corrupted itself before God. This is by Dor HaMabul, generation of the flood. So the pasuk says, "V'tano the Rabbi Shmuel b'chol makom shnemar hashchasa." Wherever the Torah uses lashon of hashchasa, of destruction, eino ela dvar erva va'avodas kochavim. That refers ultimately to immorality and to idolatry. Dvar erva shnemar, first wide line of both side 57a from Nun Zayin Amud Aleph. Dvar erva shnemar ki yeshchis kol basar es darko. Because the pasuk says every living thing corrupted its way. Avodos kocham desiv pentashchison va'asison. So therefore, we'll say whenever you see, but this actually, these type of rules of the Gemara are always quite fascinating because you could apply them throughout the Torah. So wherever you see vatishaches, corruption always means idolatry and immorality. The other opinion will say, Archei de Kamagli, Archaihu de Kamagli. Torah is just describing again the general nature of their behavior. Okay, Shvichos Damim. So we'll say, so the point over here, I just want to point out what's happening over here. What's happening over here is we are going to have 2 schools of thought. One school of thought is going to kind of learn out all the Shemisas B'nei Noach from Vayitzav, which is that, remember, and that goes back to this idea that really Adam Arishon was commanded regarding Shemisas B'nei Noach. And then there's going to be another school of thought that Shemisas B'nei Noach are learned out from other places in the Torah. Early on in Bereshis, but nevertheless not from Vayitzav. So whenever it says V'idach refers to the other opinion who learns it out from Vayitzav. Shvichos damim, what about bloodshed? D'chsev shofech dam ha'adam ba'adam. Good. So the Gemara says, V'idach katlaihu dekamagagli. And the other opinion learns that from Vayitzav will say, no, that pasuk teaches you that whenever B'nai Noach are executed, they're executed by beheading, by sayif. Gezel, theft, d'chsev, kiyarak is very interesting. Kiyarak hasodeh nasati lachem eskol. So we'll say, so remember again, this is, so the pasuk over here, right? Kol remes. This is Bereshis. So kol yerek. Sorry, ki yerek esev nasati lechem kol. So like the vegetation of the green vegetation, I've given to you everything. V'amar Levi, what does this mean? Ki yerek esev velo ki yerek gina. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu was telling man, you could have like the vegetation of the field and not the vegetation of the garden. Now, what does that mean? This is an incredible Rashi. Rashi says it's the last wide line on top of Rashi. Ki yerek Esev kari Esev ha'efer v'chal ha'gadol me'elav. So what Hashem was permitting to man was vegetation that grows on its own. Vegetation that grows on its own, in other words, hefker, ownerless, belongs to everyone. So that you could have. V'chol hagadol me'elav she'ein bo torach lachrosh v'lizroa. So ultimately, again, that means anything that grows and does not have tircha, has no effort in order to plow it and to plant it. So here Hashem is telling Adam, you could take stuff that doesn't belong to other people, right? But you can't take stuff which belongs to other people. I will say there's a real profundity in that Rashi. Rashi says, what's the difference between something that is owned and something that is ownerless? Something that is owned, in order to own something, there has to be tircha. There has to be tircha. If you want something in life, there has to be effort. See, the challenge we often encounter in life is we want the ownership of accomplishment, right? We want to go ahead and I want this and I want that and whatever the this and that is, whether it's in the material world or it's in the spiritual world. The issue is sometimes we want the ownership, but we don't want to have to expend the effort. And Rashi says that formula over here is so profound. He says, Chol hagadol me'elav. If something is ownerless, she'ein bo torach lachrosh v'lizroa. There's absolutely no effort, right? So the klal gadol is, if there's no effort, there's no ownership. If you want ownership, be it in ruchnias or gashmias, there's going to have to be the expending of incredible amounts of effort. Incredible. So Gemara goes out to the other opinion will say, Hahula mishrei basar hudasa. None of that pasuk comes to permit the consumption of meat. Eivra min hachai. Second, we're just going through the list over here. Eivra min hachai, and right that Bnei Noach can't eat the limb off of a living animal. D'chsiv, ach basar b'nafsho damo lo sochelu. You can't eat, right? You can't eat the meat of an animal while the life is still inside of the limb. But the other opinion will say, so that comes to permit shratzim to Bnei Noach, right? That Bnei Noach are permitted to eat creepy, crawly things. Sirus, castration, d'chsev, shartsu ba'aretz. So this is interesting. The fact that Hashem says that He wants the proliferation of different species, fascinatingly enough, gives rise to the prohibition of castration. Right? Because obviously, again, if you're castrating, so you're not going to have the proliferation of species. Fascinating. The Gemara says, V'idach, lebracha ba'alma. Other opinion will say, no, that's just for bracha. So, kilayim, d'chsev me'a'of l'minehu. Me'a'of l'minehu. V'idach, hahu, so kilayim means, so where did he learn kilayim? Forbidden mixtures, right? Or interbreeding of species. Ha'of l'minehu, each bird according to its species. V'idach, the other opinion will say, hahu l'tzav saba alma. It's beautiful. That's just HaKadosh Baruch Hu pointing out over here that is creating companionship for all parts of creation. In other words, the Ribono Shalom highlighting the power of companionship. And that everyone needs companionship. Even the birds need companionship. Amar Rav Yosef Amri Beirav. Asholosh mitzvos b'nei Noach nerag. Okay, so therefore, what we have over here, so there's a lot of machloksim happening over here. So first and foremost, a fundamental machlokes as to where we learn out the Shem mitzvos b'nei Noach from. That's one machlokes. Second machlokes is what comprises Shem mitzvos b'nei Noach. Remember again, that's yesterday's daf where we have the machlokes of dachsach, right? Really just the machlokes. Everybody agrees out of 5 out of the 7. There's machlokes about 2 out of the 7. Okay. So now we come to another sugya. Amar Rav Yosef, Amar Beirav, Ashalosh mitzvos b'nei Noach nerag. Bnei Noach are killed regarding over the violation of 3 of the mitzvos Bnei Noach. So which ones? Immorality, murder, and cursing of Hashem. Right? If a Ben Noach violates any of these 3, there's an automatic death penalty. So Maskef Arasheshes, Bishlam Shvichos Damim Dichsiv, Shofech Dam Ha'adam. So I understand Shvichos Damim because the pasuk says Shofech Dam Ha'adam, and again Damo Yishafach Ella Hanach Minalu. But from where do you know about the death penalty for the other 2? So the Gemara says, I gamar mishvichos damim. If you're going to learn it out, ultimately again from shvichos damim. Okay, I'm sorry, just lost the place. Good. So again, if that's the case, it's from shvichos damim, then halacha l'maisa, why not impose the death penalty on all of them? Why not say that for the violation of any of the shemisas b'nei noach? By definition, there's a death penalty. Imishum deis raboi mi ish ish avodas kochav namis are mi ish ish. And if you're going to learn out, ultimately again from ish ish, to learn out avodas are from that same source as well. Ela amrav sheishes amri beirav al arba mitzvos ben noach nerag. You're right. Truth is, on Ben Noach is really killed for the violation of 4 out of the 7, including Avodas Kochavim. So the Gemara says, really, Al Avodas Kochavim Ben Noach Nerag? Is that true that a Ben Noach is killed for the violation or for the commission of Avodah Zarah? That time we learned Ba'avodas Kochavim Dvarim Shebezin Sheisama Misin Alein Ben Noach Mushar Alein. So this is very interesting. Yet we learned that by Avodah Zarah, things that a Jewish court would execute someone for, a Ben Noach is mushar. Now we'll say, now this is interesting because the lashon of mushar literally means what? Warned. Warned. So the Gemara says, ashara in misalo. I thought that meant that there's a warning, there's an ashara, but lav dafka that there's a death penalty for it. On Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, ashara shalohen zohi misasa. No. By Ben Noach, warning by definition is death penalty. In other words, we both say this is one of the distinctions. We didn't say this explicitly, but this will come up as well. You know, we spent so much time focusing on the concept of hasra. Hasra is only a Jewish concept. A Ben Noach could be executed even without hasra. So therefore, when you see azhara, that it's a warning to Bnei Noach, that means death penalty. Rav Huna of Rav Yehuda, v'kulu tamidid Rav Amri, so Rav Huna of Rav Yehuda, all tamidim of Rav said, Hashem is Bnei Noach nerag. That really a Ben Noach is executed for the violation of any one of the Sheva mitzvos. We'll say so high stakes, so relatively few mitzvos, but very high stakes. Very high stakes. So the Gemara says, Gali Rachmana Bahada Bechada V'huadin Lakulhu. So we'll say because once the Torah revealed, once the Torah explained that there's a death penalty for one, it makes sense to say that whatever applies to one applies to the rest as well. So the Gemara says, really? Va'ala Gezel Ben Noach Nerag? Is that true that for theft, a Ben Noach is killed? Vatanya, we learned, Al HaGezel. When it comes to theft, so ganav v'gazal v'chin yifas toar. So I'll say, so again, whether a Ben Noach stole, remember again, gneva is surreptitious, secretive stealing, right? Gzela is outright theft. Yifas toar, interestingly enough, is also a form of theft. Because halacha l'maisa, you're taking, again, remember the idea of Yifas Torah is you could take a war bride. Doesn't matter, again, if she's single, if she's married, it makes no difference. So Yifas Torah also be a form of theft. V'chein kiyotze b'hain, in all of these cases, kusi b'kusi. I want to point out something very interesting over here. The Gemara over here is using the notion of kusi, but kusi in this context means a non-Jew. Right? In other words, it's not often when we use kusi. So kusi refers to the people resettled from Kusa, which was done under Shalmaneser. Shalmaneser exiled the 10 tribes, and one of his incredible strategies was he understood that the best way to ensure that there's no rebellion is take indigenous people out of their land. That way they won't rebel. So that's why he exiled the 10 tribes. And he resettled people from Kusa in Eretz Yisrael. They were called the Kusim, right? So that's the whole mice of the Kusim. There was an outbreak of lions. They converted. Was the conversion a good conversion, not a conversion? But here in this context, actually Kusi actually means a non-Jew. Doesn't mean the typical Kusi like we saw. So the Gemara says, Kusi b'Kusi b'Yisrael. So any of these cases of theft. So if it's Kusi, if it's a Kusi on Kusi theft, right? Or Kusi b'Yisrael aser. B'Yisrael b'Kusi mutter. So we'll say, interestingly enough, Kusi against Kusi, aser. Kusi against Yisrael, aser. But yet Yisrael against Kusi is going to be mutter. We'll say, now, mutter doesn't mean that it's encouraged. Mutter just means that it's not, you can't prosecute it in a court. That's what it means. And if that's the case, nisni chayiv. So, right chayiv. In other words, we'll say, if you're talking about that there's a death penalty for any one of the shemisas b'nei Noach, then the proper lashon is not aser. That's not the proper lashon. The proper lashon is chayiv. So the Gemara says, Mishum d'kabayla misni seifa Yisrael b'kusi mutter, because since we need to write that Yisrael b'kusi is mutter, again, right, that it is mutter, therefore Tana Reisha aser. Okay, we just needed linguistic symmetry. Misna katani. but it's actually wherever you see the lashon of chayiv. Chayiv always means a death penalty. Tiktani reisha ashvichos damim kusi b'kusi b'Yisrael chayiv. When it comes to bloodshed, when it comes to murder, so kusi against kusi or kusi against Yisrael is going to be chayiv. Yisrael b'kusi pater. So the Gemara says hasam heichi lisni. How else should we write it? Lisni aser umuter. If you want to write it as aser and muter, v'atanya we learn kosi v'roi behema daka lo ma'alin v'lo maridin. So I'll say this is interesting. When it comes to a kusi and roi behema daka lo ma'alin v'lo maridin. All right, so I'll say so. This requires a little bit of explanation, or a lot of bit of explanation. If you take a look at Rashi, it's in the wide lines, probably about 12 lines up from the bottom. Hakusi v'chein roi behema daka Yisrael. Shestaman gazlonin. What's come down there between a kusi and a person who shepherds small animals? They're both thieves. Remember, you've seen this Gemara before, that you're not allowed to raise behema daka in Eretz Yisrael. Right? Why not? Because they graze everywhere. They graze everywhere, and people aren't careful about having them graze on other people's lands. So kusi and roe behema daka Yisrael. Now again, this is Jews. So non-Jews, right? So kusi, and again, Jews who raise small animals are thieves. Rashi says over shestaman gazlonin shemarin behemtam besados acherim. They're thieves because they allow their animals ultimately again to shepherd on other people's lands. So what's talach? I'm reading Rashi again. Lo ma'alin v'lo moridin. Lo ma'alin osam min abar latzilam min hamisa v'lo moridin osam. If they fall into a pit, there's no obligation to go ahead and get them out, which is a pretty significant thing. But you can't throw them into the pit. Which is another way of saying they're not liable to a death penalty, but if they find themselves in compromised circumstances, you are not obligated to hoist them out. Which will say such a profound idea. Why? Like, what did these guys do so wrong? They're hurting other people. And when you hurt other people, even just financially, you are considered to be a menace to greater society. How careful we have to be, both with the property of others, with the emotions and feelings of others, just in general, how careful we have to be with other people. That literally, the Gemara says over here, that if you're one of those people who's not careful about your animal going ahead and grazing on someone else's field, and therefore you are taking something from someone else on a consistent basis and you don't care, if you fall into a pit, we don't have an obligation to help you get out. It's like mind-blowing. Why? Because you're not a nice person. Because you're not considerate of other people. And if you're not considerate of other people, to be honest, society doesn't need you. And maybe if you're not considerate of other people, it could very well be that society is actually better off without you. It's an overwhelming and shocking statement, but nevertheless incredibly true. So the Gemara goes weiter. So kiyotze bo begezel mai. What is the comparable case when it comes to theft? So Rav Acha bar Yaakov lo nitzcha ela lepol bekerem. So the comparable case would be a worker in a vineyard. So the Gemara says, okay, pol bekerem emas. So when exactly is the worker in the field? So remember, he also says halacha. What's the halacha? That if somebody's working in a field at the time of the harvest, then what's the halacha? They're allowed to eat. They're allowed to eat while they're harvesting. And if it's not at the time of the completion of work, then it's just straight out theft. So we'll say this is fascinating. Or rather, what are we talking about? A case of theft less than a pruta. Less than a pruta. Okay, what does that mean? Ihachi kusi b'Yisrael aser harbar mechilahu. So we'll say, here's what's interesting. But if we're talking about theft of less than a pruta, if a kusi steals less than a pruta from a Jew is much. I will say in general, the halacha is if you steal less than a pruta from someone, right? There's no liability. Now, why is there no liability? Why not? Because the assumption is that people are mochel on less than a pruta. I don't care. So we'll say, so this is fascinating. So the Gemara says, listen to this Gemara. Hachi kusi b'Yisrael Aser. So the Gemara says, I don't understand. So if a kusi steals less than a pruta from a Jew, why should it be chayiv? Generally, we're mochel on less than a pruta. To which the Gemara says, you're right. Nihi de basar hachi mochel. Even though the Jew is mochel, tsara b'shaite mi lesle. So does he not have tsar at the time of the theft? In other words, while it's true that the Jew will be mochel, it's absolutely true, but lamaisa, there's still pain and difficulty caused at the time of the theft itself, which I will say is such a profound idea. So listen to this concept just in the realm of relationships. You know, sometimes in life it's very important to remember that if you wrong someone, you may gain forgiveness, but just because you gain forgiveness, don't think that the pain is gone. So there could be mechila, but the pain of the personalistic infraction is absolutely still there and can very often remain for a very long time afterwards. You know, people sometimes we don't understand this in relationships where we do something legitimately wrong, we apologize, and we think, okay, I apologize, like we're good, right? We're good, and like let's just move forward. And then somehow, sometime later on, the infraction, right, comes up again. Like, I don't understand what happened. You forgave me. So I'll say it's important to understand people Klal Gadol in human beings is we forgive and we never forget. We never forget. That's the way it works. And when you hurt someone, just understand they will remember that infraction forever. That's human nature. I can still forgive, but I never forget. And even if there is forgiveness, it's important to understand that sometimes the pain of what was done will still remain for some time afterwards. So the Gemara goes weiter. So kusi bekusi kiltzi bohen kevon the labene mechila ninu gazal ma'al yuhu. Supposed to listen to this. Say this is profound. Wherein lies the distinction between the Jew and the kusi? So the Jew is mochel. The Jew is mochel ultimately again on less than a shara pruta. The kusi is not mochel on less than a shara pruta. Kusi bekusi the lav bnei mechila ninu. So listen to this lashon over here. Kusi bekusi they're not bnei mechila. Not mechila. Therefore, again, gezel ma'al yuhu. Therefore, again, stealing even less than a shara pruta, ultimately, again, is going to be gezel ma'al. It's going to be complete gezel. Well, so I'll just point out something amazing. Lashon over here. So many profound yisodos in these gemaras. Well, so look at this lashon. Sikusim are lav b'nei mechila. Right? So they're not capable of mechila. We'll say, what happens when you are an unforgiving person? What happens when you're an unforgiving person? Every single slight is a major infraction. When you are not, and also we know this in life, there are people, Rabbi Nachman, one of the best statements Rabbi Nachman writes, he has such a simple statement, he says, Tov liyos vatron. It is good to be a forgiving person. It's good to let things go. Because what's the alternative? The alternative, if you don't let things go, is your lav b'nei mechila. Pretty much, if you're not a mevater, I hate to say this, if you're not a yielding or forgiving person, you know what you are? You're a kusi. You're a kusi. Kusim are not b'nei mechila. So if you're not b'nei mechila, you're not a forgiving person, then every single thing is a slight. And there are people who go like this, right? There are people who go through life and they're always offended. They're always offended. This one said this, and this one did this, and this one did this. Right? People are jerks. That's just the way that it is, right? Klal Gadol in life, people are jerks, right? So Lamaisa, people are going to say stuff that's offensive. They're going to do stuff that's offensive. They're ingrateful. They don't say thank you. They're unappreciative. They're not nice. They're demanding. They'll take you for everything. That's the way that it is. So you have a choice. The choice is you could be lav b'nei mechila. Right? You could be an unforgiving person, and therefore everything is an infraction. And you walk around life perpetually wounded. Or you could be a b'nei mechila. You could be b'nei mechila. You could be the kind of person, like Rabbi Nachman says, tov lios vatron. And if you're mevater, if you're forgiving, and if you're yielding, you recognize, okay, people are the way that they are. But I am not going to allow it to hold me back from living the life I want to live and doing the things I need to do. And the Gemara says over here, that's the chilik between the Yid and the Kusi. The Kusi alav b'nei mechila ninu. The power of the Yid is that we are b'nei mechila. And once you have that power, nothing and no one holds you back. Incredible. I'm sure I have like a lot pent up from not being here for a couple of days. I'm sorry. So Something I saw that I finished the other daf, yesterday's daf. I think I recorded it in like 32 minutes. Not sure exactly how I did that, but okay. All right, so where does the case come up? This is interesting. Holding back wages. Holding back wages. So the Gemara says, kusi b'kusi b'Yisrael aser. So kusi against the kusi against Yisrael is going to be aser. Yisrael b'kusi mutter. But Yisrael b'kusi is mutter. Again, I'll also remember again, when you see this mutter doesn't mean encouraged. Mutter just means that you can't prosecute it in a beis din. Kiyotze b'yifastar mahi. So what would be the parallel case by yifastar? Ki aser avdimi amar Elazar amar Mechanina. This is very interesting. Ben Noach sheyichid shivcha la'avdo ba'ala naragala. If a Ben Noach set aside a shivcha for his eved, right? A Ben Noach has an eved, he set aside a shivcha for his eved, and then he had relations with that shivcha, neragala, he would be killed for an act of immorality with her. Kiyotze bo the shvichos damim lo tanya. But again, the Gemara doesn't discuss a parallel case by bloodshed. Amar Abaye, imeshkachos the Sanya Rabbi Yosef ben Sholhi. The Sanya Rabbi Yosef ben Shol Omer. Rodif acharos. This is very interesting. Rodif achar chavero. So what happens? So if somebody, Reuben was running after Shimon, was pursuing Shimon to kill him, and Shimon obviously has the right to defend himself. But let's say Shimon had the ability to defend himself by injuring Reuben in the leg, right? And what happens? V'lo hitzil on the base. And instead of injuring Reuben in the leg, he shoots Shimon in the head. Right? So in other words, he delivers a mortal wound. So if remember, we had this by the Gemaras of Yoav, Amasa, or Avner ben Ner Agalav. So there is culpability for that, which is very interesting. So this culpability is, so in other words, we'll say, if somebody is pursuing me, I have the right, not just the right, but the halachic mandate to go ahead and defend myself. But if I could defend myself, I guess what we'll call like in a non-lethal way, but instead I use lethal force, the halacha finds me responsible and culpable for that. Ashkach, if you take a look at Rashi, top Rashi nun zayin beis, neragalav, henu kiyotze bo the shvichos damim, da have karov lahatir, ve'ino mutter b'kusi b'Yisrael chay, v'chein Yisrael b'Yisrael b'kusi potter. Fine. Simon says as follows: Ashkach Rabbi Yaakov bar Acha, tavi kaseh b'sefer Agada for debate Rav. So Rabbi Yaakov bar Acha, so that they're writing the sefer Agada of debate Rav. Ben Noach nerag b'dayin echad, u be'ed echad shelo b'hasra, mipi ish v'lo mipi isha b'afilu karov. So this is very interesting. So a lot of halachas over here about a Ben Noach. Number one, a Ben Noach could be executed by a beis din of one judge. Next, one witness. Number three, without hasra. Number four, has to be a man, right? A male witness and not a female. But the male witness could even be related. Afilu b'karov. So the Gemara says, V'afilu karov. Mishnar b'shmal amru, af al ha'obrin. It's supposed to say it's going to be an incredible sugya. A Ben Noach is responsible even for aborting a fetus. There is capital liability even for performing an abortion. There's a big sugya over here. Af al ha'obrin. Again, we'll see where that comes from. Rashi says over here, it's the first short line in Rashi, Af al ha'obrin, hika es ha'isha v'yatzu yiladeh. If a man struck a woman and as a result she miscarried her pregnancy, nerag aleim. There's dual, right? So in other words, he'd be liable for injuring the woman and also for causing the death of the fetus. Ubi Yisrael achi yetzi la'avira olam. So we'll say this is an interesting discussion over here. Rashi's understanding over here is that there is no liability for killing a fetus up until it comes into the world. Only once it comes into the world is it considered to be alive for capital purposes. For capital purposes, we had a Ben Noach is responsible even for aborting a fetus. Again, we'll see this a little bit more. So where do you know all of this from? All of these halachas. So we'll say that was a lot of information just thrown our way. Where do we know all of this from? Here we go. Ach es dimchem lenafshosechem edrosh. So the pasuk says over here. So va'ach es dimchem lenafshosechem edrosh miyad kol chaya edroshenu umiyad ha'adam miyad ish achiv edrosh es nefeshanu. So again, back to Sefer Bereshis. So listen to this. I will seek out your blood. Literally again, I will seek out, literally translated, I will seek out your blood for your life. I will seek out from you. Afilu b'dayan echad. So you see from here that capital case is by a Ben Noach. can be adjudicated by even one judge. And where do they get that one judge? Edrosh. I will seek out, that's singular. So from here you see that a ben noach can even be adjudicated by one judge. Miyad kol chaya, from every animal, afilu shelo basra. Just like an animal doesn't get hasra, so too again the ben noach doesn't require hasra as well. Edroshenu umiyad ha'adam, I will seek it out, and even again miyad ha'adam, from the hand of a person, singular, afilu be'ed echad, even 1/8. Miyad ish, right, from the hands of a man, v'lo miyad isha. So as much as it could be one witness, it has to be a male witness, not a woman. Achiv, his brother, afilu karov, even if that one witness is related to him. Rabbi Shmuel said that Ben Noach is liable even for causing the death of a fetus. My time with Rabbi Shmuel. What's Rabbi Shmuel's logic? Tichsiv, shofech dam ha'adam ba'adam damo yishafach. So this is very interesting. The lashon over here is one who spills the blood of man in man. That's how the pasuk literally translated. Shofech dam ha'adam ba'adam. Spill the blood of man in man, damo yishafach. His blood will be spilled. So the Gemara says, Eizehu adam shehu ba'adam. What's a case of a man in a man? Havi omer ze'ubar shemai imo. That refers to a fetus in its mother. So you see from here that there's culpability or there's liability for a ben noach who causes the death of a fetus. The Tanakamo, Tanat ben Menashe, the Amar, kol misa ha'amur l'bnei noach eino ela b'chenek. This Gemara says, so again, interestingly enough, Tanat ben Menashe say, or the Tanakamo, who was Tanat ben Menashe, says, what does he use this pasuk for? He uses this pasuk to teach me that anytime death is mentioned for Bnei Noach, it's always strangulation. So we'll say, so this is what we said before. Up until now, Bima was operating with the principle that the death for Bnei Noach is saif, is beheading. So there is apparently another school of thought, and the other school of thought says, no, the death for Bnei Noach, is chenek, is strangulation. Now where does he get that from? It's very interesting. V'shadi lehai ba'adam asefa dekra. And he puts that ba'adam at the end of the pasuk, and he reads like this: V'darish be'hachi ba'adam damo yishafach. So we'll say ultimately again, when there is punishment for a ben noach for violation of any one of these infractions, so how is he killed? Ba'adam damo yishafach. So literally again, in man, his blood will be spilled. Ezu shvichos dam shel adam shebeguvav shel adam. How is there ever a case of execution where the blood of the person remains inside of the person? Where do you ever have a case like that? So Havi Omer Zechenek, that's strangulation. Because it will say, as opposed to other forms of death where the blood comes out, strangulation is the blood remains inside of the person. So what's the type of death where blood remains in the person? That's going to be strangulation. Master Rav Hamnuna, so just by the way, as you're keeping your tally of ongoing machloksim, interestingly enough, we thought like the one piece that everyone agreed on is that a ben noach is always executed with chenek. I'm sorry, with saif, with beheading. Now it turns out that that's a machlokes also. Now the interesting part that what everyone does agree with is Ben Noach is going to have one uniform death penalty, as opposed to Yisrael, who ultimately, again, there's 4 different types of capital punishments. A Ben Noach is only going to have one. Whether that one is chenek or whether that one is saif, that's an ongoing machlokes. Okay, Maser Rav Hamnuna, v'ishalom mifkuda. About saying that, interestingly enough, is that true that a woman is not permitted to be part of a beis din for Bnei Noach? But we learn kiyedativ l'man hashayit tzava. So the pasuk says, right? Kiyedativ l'man hashayit tzava. Look at Rashi. Rashi says over here, v'isha basloach l'mifkada aladin. So beso. And the Torah uses lashon of beso when it comes to the concept, ultimately again, of creating legal systems, and beso includes women. So what's going on over here? Who most of whom mafarik law. This is very interesting. Banav lidin. Ultimately, what Hashem was saying was, this is about Avram Avinu, right? Banav lidin. So I'll say, but I just want to point out, fascinatingly enough, the pasuk is about Avram Avinu, but yet, amazingly enough, it's using it for Bnei Noach, which makes sense because Am Yisroel is not only the father of the Jews. He's also the father of a number of different nations. Many, remember again, the end of Parashas Chayesara, right? That Avram Avinu remarries after the death of Sarah Imenu, and he has all of these other kids, right? All of these other nations. So those are all Bnei Noach nations. So it's fascinating. So when the pasuk says over here, Ki Yedativ, right? Ki Yedativ Lamana Sheyitzava Es Banav Ves Beisa Acharav. V'shamru derech Hashem lasos tzedakah u'mishpat. I know that Avram will command his children, his offspring, lasos tzedakah u'mishpat. So now the Gemara says something amazing. Banav ledin. The sons, men, those are the ones who are in charge of the judicial system. Beiso, the daughters, the women, l'tzedakah. Ultimately, again, tzedakah are for the kindness, for the tzedakah piece, for the charitable pieces. So I'll say, so interestingly enough, there's differentiated roles in the offspring of Avram Avinu by Bnei Noach. I'll say it's also quite profound. I think the Gemara is also giving us a fascinating insight also into the distinction between the nature of men and women, right? How often in general, and I don't know why this is, but it would appear that women are often much more forgiving than men. You know, certainly again in the paternal and maternal realms, right? It's often the father who is the din, right, and the mother who is the rachamim. Just a fascinating idea that banav ledin. So often again it's the father who is the din, the beso, the mother who is the tzedakah. Beautiful. Amrei Rav Avia Saba l'Rav Papa. Ema bas noach shner galot tihareg. So if that's the case, maybe you're going to say that women are excluded from the judicial system in totality. So maybe halach l'mayis again a bas noach is not executed if she kills someone. In other words, maybe it's not just that she's not a judge, but maybe she's just not included in the judicial system at all. Miyad ish v'lo miyad isha ksiv. The pasuk says, Amar Haki, Amar Rav Yehuda, Shofek Tama Adam, I'm sorry. Miyad ish v'lo miyad isha ksiv. Amar Haki, Amar Rav Yehuda, Shofek dam ha'adam mikom makom. No. Anyone who kills is liable. It doesn't make a difference if it's a man, if it's a woman. There's always going to be liability for that. Ema bas noach shezin saloti hareg. So maybe a bas noach who commits adultery shouldn't go ahead, or who engages in znos, shouldn't be killed. Because the pasuk says, Al kin yazov ish velo isha. And as it's interesting, the Torah phrases marriage as a man will leave his mother and father and cling to his wife. Maybe only the man is obligated in the clinging, but the woman is not. So the Gemara says, because the pasuk says they will become one flesh. The Torah comes and equates man and woman. Just as the man is not permitted to stray, so too the woman is not permitted to stray as well. TORAH banon. So Ron goes back to ish. Matam lomar. Why does the pasuk say ish? The Gemara says, Matam lomar ish rabos esakusim shemusharin ala harayos ki Yisrael. To teach us, ultimately, again, ish comes to teach us. So we'll say the pasuk the Gemara is quoting over here is ish el she'er bisarod lo sikrevu legalos erva. So the Torah uses the double ocean of ish to teach us that even kusim, even bnei Noach, are obligated regarding arayos. Is we learn out from here. Leimar. We'll say this goes back to our drasha beforehand. The pasuk Leimar, right by Adam Rishon. Zeg gilarayos hasam ba'arayos didahu v'hacha ba'arayos didan. So we'll say this is very interesting. There, by Adam Rishon, is talking about arayos of Ben Noach with a Ben Noach. Here is talking about Ben Noach with a Jew. Both systems, right? Both forms of arayos are going to be prepared. I will say no to stop over here. We'll pick up in Meretz Hashem with this section tomorrow. What an incredible journey! And I will say, I will point out that tomorrow, the next day, we'll get to the halacha l'maisa, what actually comprises Shem Esas B'nai Noach and what is liability. Shkayach, I will say. All right, Chem Razum, have a great day, everyone. It's good to see everyone.
What I might do is set up over there. I could kind of lock the door.
Yeah, and then just just put up a sign that says, yeah, it's perfect. That's great. And it just has to be high enough that's great. And where's the projector? On that table. Perfect. Yeah, and let's just put a sign on the door that just says, perfect, that's great. Yeah, I think that's better than in this corner.
Space here.